We've all got those childhood movies that scarred us. Mine was Child of Glass, which aired on The Wonderful World of Disney in 1978, and returned to terrorize us for years afterwards on the Disney Channel. This was the adaptation of a moderately popular but genuinely great young adult novel called The Ghost Belonged to Me. The source novel is, to be honest, far superior to the television adaptation, and this brings up a lot of questions. But first, a quick overview of the plot, or rather the plots. There's a kid, Alexander, whose family has moved to the south. How long they've lived there is a little vague. In the book, set at the turn of the 20th century, they had moved south when the kid was little, and it's only been a few decades since the Civil War, so Alexander's mother desperately is trying to fit in with local gentry and puts on local airs, building a lattice pavilion and knocking down any signs of being nouveau riche from their property. She's aided by her cantankerous Uncle Miles, who actually has deep roots in the area. The movie dumps most of the book's cultural subtleties, setting the story in modern times and muddling the waters of exactly what the family's relationship to the town is. They move into a new home, one of the biggest in the county, but Alexander doesn't even change schools. A lot of what had made the novel beautiful gets lost. What is kept, but beefed up, is the ghost story at the movie's heart. The family's barn is haunted by the ghost of a beautiful young French or maybe Cajun girl.
You must help me, Alexander. We have only a short time to solve the riddle.
A little hard to tell since Inez Dumain's accent sounds a bit like the French knight from Monty Python.
I'm French! Why do you think I have this outrageous accent?
Alexander is unsure of how to interact with a dead girl, so he enlists the help of a weird classmate named Blossom Culp. Blossom's aunt, her mother in the novel, is a spiritualist, so the kids sneak in to use her crystal ball to find out what happened to Inez and how to help her. This was where it all got really scary when I was 6. Less so now that I'm in my 50s. Inez had been chased to death by her uncle, who wanted to retrieve a secret cache of diamonds stolen by river pirates. That sentence right there is my excuse for reviewing this mediocre TV special. And it pays off, with Alexander running into his own terrifying murderous adult, an alcoholic handyman recently fired by Alexander's family. The resolution of the mystery is pretty satisfying, and it's about the scariest TV special of the era besides Dark Night of the Scarecrow. Then there are the gaps. I've already mentioned the stripping away of the cultural tension, which honestly shoots in the novel for To Kill a Mockingbird levels of genius, another novel whose film adaptation falls short of the source material. Inez, in this novel, merely shows up a couple of times with her soggy dog and she barely speaks. The film has her spouting riddles.
Sleeping lies the murdered lass, vainly cries the child of glass. When the two shall be as one, the spirit's journey will be done.
And in its most charming scene, manifesting herself corporally to have a cotillion dance with Alexander. The emphasis shifts away entirely from Alexander's neurotic family and their attempts to infiltrate Southern society, which are often pretty funny, and onto the horror of Inez's murder and her desire to reconnect with the living. The novel's Inez simply wants her remains moved to New Orleans with her ancestors, which great Uncle Miles is able to do with a little trickery against the local media and some help from Alexander's school friend Blossom. All of the issues of turn-of-the-century technology, including a near-fatal trolley crash that made the cover of the novel, are removed, along with the cultural questions central to the novel. In the book, Alexander's romance is not with the ghostly Inez, but with the complicated Blossom Culp, who simultaneously leads him into the spirit world, but then refuses to interact with it because she is terrified. He's grossed out by seeing his great-uncle reunite with a trashy old flame in New Orleans, but he sees in them a flash forward to see what he and Blossom might become. Similarly, his materialistic elder sister gives up on the high-born beau that she's been courting in favor of a resourceful, gentlemanly reporter. Romantic pragmatism is all around, a fair stretch from the movie's Waltz with a Ghost. In the end, it would be fair to say that all the novel and Disney's adaptation for TV have in common is merely the names of the three main characters and that there's a ghost of a little girl. The biggest mystery is why they claim to have adapted the novel at all, since even the title has been changed. The movie's villain is also radically retooled. Instead of a maimed railway worker with PTSD, we get a drunk handyman with a personal grudge. It makes parallel stories for Inez and Alexander, but it lacks any of the emotional resonance from the book, where the wounded man sabotages a bridge and nearly kills a few dozen trolley passengers. Where the movie hooks back into Disney culture is, well, it's quirky. The story of an old pirate who kills a close female relative was the origin story for the Haunted Mansion ride, still glimpsed in the hanging corpse in the vestibule vestibule and the ghost bride in the attic, and the mansion's nautical weather vane. The original walkthrough version of Pirates of the Caribbean shared this storyline. Pirate captain murders his new bride when she realizes who he is. This story eventually surfaced in the very creepy Phantom Manor in Paris. With Pirates and Mansion premiering immediately after Walt's death, the surfacing of another pirate kills his pretty relative story about a decade later is not too surprising. The studio was merely trying to salvage all the material they could. So the shift from the tragic, sad river captain in the book to the treasure-seeking murderer in the movie fits the plot line of both versions of Haunted Mansion. Years later, the bride herself was turned into the murderer at Disneyland, but that's another story. The other place this fits in, which I discussed in my review of Something Wicked This Way Comes, is the trend of 70s and 80s Disney to dabble in children's horror. I'm definitely not against that, and I think doing horror for kids without the wink-wink nudge-nudge of Frankenweenie and Paranorman, which were both great, by the way, it's not such a bad thing. Give them a few nightmares. The Never-Ending Story, Return to Oz, Willy Wonka, these movies don't apologize. I'm not entirely sure why Watership Down was a horror show, but The Last Unicorn is mostly fine. Neither of those particularly respected their source material either, and both worked. My observation really is that we just get freaked out by works of art, and I have no problem with studios throwing spaghetti at the wall to see if it sticks. I wish there was a lot more spaghetti on the wall in today's cinema. I cannot promise that anyone coming to this film for the first time today will find it anything less than 1970s camp. Like most of the Wonderful World of Disney's original material from that era, we were a far cry from the innovative futurist specials of the 1950s and the slick production qualities of the 1990s. The horrible production values didn't really bother me because I was 6 years old, and you took what you got on the 3 TV channels we had back then. This film worked for me as a kid for several reasons. It was just the right amount of scary, with a pair of crazy murderers, a seance at the beginning of the Satanic Panic years, and a mystery involving pirate treasure. It had a romantic veneer, with a hopeless attraction between a Yankee outsider and a long-dead French aristocrat. And nostalgia is a heck of a drug. If you don't seek this out, and unless you saw it as a child, and I don't recommend it, go back and rewatch the thing that gave you the scared Ghiblies as a kid. It won't hit as hard, but it will make you smile.
Come on in here. Tell Ghibli